Mid-price madness is back. Selecting a player at a bargain price who scores like a top dollar premium is one of the best feelings in SuperCoach. A lot more mid-price picks blow up than become season-long keepers, but those players are out there every year, and if you nail it, it can give you a huge advantage on the competition. So who will be the Elliot Yeo of 2025? Hello, welcome to the official SuperCoach AFL show. Today we are talking mid-prices, which we are classifying as players priced between $300,000 and $500,000 to start the year. Basically, if you're not a premium and you're not a rookie, you're a mid-pricer. And our job today is to sort the contenders from the pretenders. I'm your host, Al Paton, joined by some SuperCoach luminaries for a really, which will be a really fun discussion today. With me in the studio in Melbourne here is Chloe Williams. Chloe, welcome back for your first appearance in 2025 and keen to get into some mid-price chat.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am a bit of a sucker for a mid-price pick, so I'm very keen to discuss these. And you're right, they do tend to blow up fairly often, but hopefully this will be the year that I finally nail one.
Well, yeah, one. Hopefully we can get a few more than one. That'll be the aim at the end of this show. Darcy, back with us again. You've got a lot of Eagles on your hit list, I'm assuming, today?
Yeah, I'll try and keep the bias down as much as I possibly can. But no, I'm also a sucker for a mid-price pick. Traditionally, it has ruined many of my seasons in the past. And look, here's hoping for another season ruined this year, because there are so many mid-prices this year that are tempting, perhaps more than ever I can remember in the last maybe 5 years. There's just so many that have caught my eye. Keen to get stuck into this discussion. I'm sure there's plenty that we won't be able to touch on today because there's just that many available.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we have a special guest with us again today, joining us from the Coaches Panel podcast or YouTube show. It's on all the great platforms. And if you haven't caught it already, MJ starting the world famous countdown of his 50 most relevant players for SuperCoach and Fantasy for 2025. He's about 5 players into that list, so you can easily go back and listen to those first few, and that'll be counting down all the way through to round 1. But MJ, thanks for jumping on today, and hopefully there'll be a few of these mid-prices on that list in the top 50.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Yeah, I got to admit, I could do a 50 most relevant on mid-prices, couldn't I? There is so many that we could spend our time on. I promise I haven't done that with the countdown, but absolutely thrilled today to spend some time talking with a few guys that might have made the 50 or may still make it. We'll see how we go.
Yes. Excellent. So the format today, guys, will be something a bit of a live draft. We'll go around the room naming our favourite mid-price gambles for 2025. If someone has already taken one of your picks, they're off the table. So we should get some interesting names which we can debate as we go. Now, it's not strictly a draft, so we don't have to say who's at pick 1 necessarily, but we'll just talk about players that we like. And obviously, as we've touched on, there is plenty to talk about in 2025, and the order that Dossie says he used some kind of online randomizer. I'm not totally sure. I didn't see it, but the order he came out with was Chloe with the number 1 pick, Doss in number 2, then MJ, and I bring up number 4. But Chloe, do you want to kick us off in a minute? Before you do that, we better remind people to rate the show wherever you're listening, or if you're watching on the Code Sports YouTube channel where you can get all your SuperCoach content, subscribe so you don't miss an episode. There's a mountain of great podcast and video content heading your way this pre-season. And final reminder, we're talking about players priced between $300,000 and $500,000, which means some of the really popular value options we're talking about this year won't qualify today. No one can pick Caleb Daniel in this podcast, but we will have a special show dedicated to those guys next week. So stay tuned for that. So we better kick it off. Chloe, I suppose the question off the top is, what is the point of picking at mid-prices in SuperCoach? Is that too much to throw at you before you give us your first name?
Well, I can give you my personal opinion. My favourite part, I suppose, about picking mid-prices is just to really get that value, really start that cash gen early while also getting some strong scores on the field, essentially. So that's what I look for the most in my picks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, if you look, there's 1 or 2 maybe each year that turn into season-long keepers. You're thinking, Hall of Fame guys like a Jack Zeeble or a Stephen Caniglio. But really, if you can get to the midpoint of the year and you've made $150,000 out of these guys and turn them into a premium, then that's exactly what we're aiming for. So who's on your hit list coming in hot at number 1 on today's show?
So I do, as I said, love a mid-pricer. I also love Carlton. So that only leaves me with one man at the top of my list who is currently in the team picker version of my team at $447.7K. Perfect price, I think, for Adam Cerra. So I'm very keen to lock him in for this year. I think he's a bit of a forgotten hero after a great 2023. Almost won the Carlton John Nichols medal, the best and fairest, before that hamstring injury, which essentially derailed his 2024 season, as we all know. So in 2024, he only managed 12 games, 2 tons in those games. But in 2023, he averaged 108 Supercoach points, including 12 tons. No early buy either. So we obviously have the hamstring issue, a bit of an elephant in the room, but obviously I'm being optimistic in thinking that he'll overcome that. Had the trip to Qatar, so I think that should fix him up nicely. Putting in all the work, I've been down to a couple of preseason trainings at Carlton, and he's running well, clean hands, as we all know that he has. So, yeah, I'm very keen on him, more particularly for myself. Even though he obviously had that injury-riddled year, I remember being at Carlton Melbourne in round 9 last year. Carlton went off to that hot start, and he was absolutely essential in that hot start. 21 disposals, 4 tackles and 4 clearances at halftime before having to exit the game at halftime with, unfortunately, that hamstring injury, which has come up once again. But that was an incredible start, and that was also, unfortunately, coming right off a hamstring injury. So it was his first game back. Only managed the half, but what he was able to do in that half just kind of showed me that he has that bounce back element in him to be able to come back from injury and perform straight away.
I'll throw straight to MJ on this because we talked about his top 50 countdown, and when I uploaded my new episodes of podcast this morning, Adam Cerra was sitting there, I think, number 44 in the countdown. So you've obviously done plenty of thinking about him. So where do you sit on him as a pick for this year? And what's your philosophy on picking some of these guys who are really injury prone, as we know, obviously Adam has been, but in the past maybe we've written them off. But someone like Elliot Yeo last year showed that players can defy their injury history and can give us a real bonus in Supercoach.
Yeah, they absolutely can. And what Chloe's pointed out beautifully for us is this isn't just a speculative mid-pricer that we hope could pop with the right role. We hope could get that scoring share in Supercoach is they've done that. There was a run of games in 2023 from rounds 5 to 17. He goes at a Supercoach average of 119. This is Bontempelli-esque Butters. This is the top of the line premium midfielders. So if you're prepared to add some risk profile to your side to start the year, Chloe's nailed it. Like there's an element of risk, but the reward almost balances it out. My philosophy with guys with injury risk is you start them or you fade them entirely. You bank the games that they're going to give you. You bring in some of that risk at your start. And then as the season goes on, trading into them is now using a trade to bring them in and increasing the variable likelihood of having to use another trade or two to get them out. So I'm a big believer of bank the points, bank the games, absorb the risk in your starting squad. And what Supercoach has done so well this year is by adding the flex and having one of these scores drop out of your 22, it gives an element of protection for you to pick a player like Cerra that's got an injury profile. So to me, I think he's right in the mix. I'm very, very comfortable and confident looking at Cerra if you're shopping in the mid-price range in your midfield.
Yeah, and there's obviously a few guys in there. Darcy, any quick thoughts on Cerra before you give us your number 2 pick?
Well, recent history says anyone that goes to Qatar has an absolute explosion return to form, as we saw. Elliot Yeo, I think you mentioned off the top, was one of the smash plays from last year. Recent trip over there. But no, I think, as you said, MJ as well, Chloe's hit the nail on the head there. And Cerra, his lowest time on ground of his career. So you factor that in and there's upside immediately, regardless of what role he's playing. Just getting on the field is going to get him a better score build. So Adam Cerra for me, certainly in that range. And looking at their schedule too, I mentioned it last week, Carlton with one of the more favourable schedules to start the season. They play Richmond, North Melbourne and West Coast before round 6. So if you're looking to build that value quickly, as we like to do with a mid-pricer, he looks like a perfect option. And one, probably not the first player that people would have maybe thought was going to be on the show, but I like that we've come at a bit of a different angle. I might kick it off with my first pick now, though. I'm going Jack Macrae, who I consider the biggest lock of Supercoach 2025 after looking at some of these numbers here. 12 seasons in the AFL. Let's look at some of these numbers here. 7 100-plus Supercoach averages. 3 with 95-plus. So that's 10 of the 12 seasons we've got 95-plus Supercoach average. So only 2 seasons less than 95. Which were those ones? It was his rookie year where he was getting stuffed around a heap, if you remember that year, many years ago now. And then last year where he was getting completely bevoed. So those are the 2 seasons where he's averaged under 95 Supercoach, priced at 73. He's now forward eligible. We know that he's moved to St Kilda to play midfield. So the upside's just incredible. 12% centre bounces last year. You'd expect him to just go straight into the St Kilda midfield. 68% time on ground last year as well, which is just way unders for what we know Jack Macrae can do. And last but not least, spent some time in the VFL, 3 games in the VFL, and showed that when he's playing midfield, he's still one to not be messed with. 42 disposals per game, 179 Supercoach average. So this guy, for me, just lock him away. Don't think about it twice. St Kilda have room for him in their midfield, and they need this veteran. 30 years old, 30 years young, I like to say. He's ready to go. So Jack Macrae, for me, absolute lock and perfect mid-pricer at just 392,000.
Anyone got any concerns about Jack Macrae? I mean, the only thing I can think of is if, did Bevo see something that we didn't? And, maybe he's lost that step of pace and, there was a reason he wasn't playing him in the midfield. Or do we just think, this is just Bevo being Bevo? MJ, any concerns that Macrae won't be able to get back to? I mean, we're not going to get a 120 out of him, we don't think, but 100 should be doable, you think?
You'd assume so. And especially just look at the ownership percentage of it too. Like, it's the kind of player like Dossie's highlighted for us, just his legacy and pedigree of scoring. If you go against a guy that's got so much value and so much high ownership, you're on the back foot from the get-go, whereas you're at least protected. If he does quote unquote bust and only give you what his average and his price is at, well, 50-60% of the community, let alone the hardcore coach where it's a higher percentage threshold, you're kind of protected with that. I think the only thing for me is the Saints so much score through uncontested possessions. Like, they're 5th for possessions last year, 12th for Supercoach scoring. It's just that balance of that midfield. I'm curious. It's not a reason to fade him, but I'm curious, like, does Phillipou keep that end of season run and roll? Does Windhager still play that negating midfielder role? Does Sinclair pop a little bit more centre bounce opportunities with Toby Travaglia coming in and that run and carry defender? If so, okay, maybe our expectations are probably the thing that might need to be just tweaked a little bit. But yeah, there's a lot of pretty positive signs about Jack, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. So what's the third name you can give us? Your number one pick, if we want to call it that today.
Oh, I don't know if I'd say it's my number one pick. It's one I like to talk about, though. Brand new Adelaide Crow, James Peatling. I'm going to put him in the mix at 352,800, coming in with an average of 65, which is just wild value because he had 7 games last year where he starts with the green vest. You just look at games he plays in full, he's going at an average of 92 in Supercoach. So there's 30 points per game of value straight away, let alone if he picks up the centre bounce opportunities that I'm certain he will get at Adelaide when a third of the AFL system come looking for your services in trade period. You get to dictate so much about where and why you choose to go. The Crows need a player like him because when he got 50% of centre bounces last year at the Giants, he goes at a whopping average of 98.3 in Supercoach. So now this is hitting that territory, Zal, that you talked about at the top of the podcast of getting in-baked value that can perform right on the ledge of a premium. Peatling does that, and he sits that Crows game style so beautifully. They're a high repetition stoppage team. The way Riley O'Brien hits the ball within about a 30-centimetre radius of his feet, it just creates a lot of contested footy, a lot of stoppages, not a lot of fast ball movement, and his contested ball winning, his explosiveness from speed, and then just his ability to tackle with ferocity. I know, Dossie, you've gone down to trainings and just seen that firsthand, that he will happily take someone's torso off them if he can just run through with a tackle. So to me, I look at all these elements and go, oh, I really like that. Like round 8 last year, 24 touches with a 116 score in Supercoach, and that's with a 58% disposal efficiency. 12 weeks later in round 20, 28 touches, 11 tackles, and 71% efficiency, and goes at a 133. So to me, if you're shopping in that mid-price range and trying to avoid the early season buys that can often kind of be really sticky for us, he kind of hits all those boxes, and I think it's a clear pathway to the Crows midfield presence that we need.
Could I just ask you, MJ, what sort of role do you think he does have in that midfield to start the season? Because we've seen sort of a great variety of mix that they're going to have. Obviously, we're going to keep an eye on pre-season, and we can just determine that when we see it in action. But what's your gut feel on how much sort of time he does spend in the midfield?
Yeah, I think he's probably going to be a 65-70% sort of centre bounce attendance sort of player. He is a clearance and a stoppage and a defensive-minded mid. I know there's some concern that the Crows midfield could be really chaotic and really haphazard this year. I'm probably the entire opposite way. To me, it's really pretty clear. I think what they've done with the development of Dan Curtin, the recruitment of Cumming, as well as Peatling and also Neil Bullen, I think that midfield looks pretty solid to me. Of Dawson as the leader, Soligo as your accumulator, Peatling boots Berry out with that defensive work rate and also brings some speed, and then Rankin and a little bit of Sid Draper as really the core five. To me, it feels pretty clear. I know I don't see a room for a Matt Crouch. I think Laird is back to half back. So, yeah, I think he's going to be one of the highest centre bounce attendance guys at the Crows this year.
No, Chloe, you'll be a little bit annoyed that pick got taken away, because you were looking at picking Peatling when he was still the Giants, if I remember rightly. But
yes.
Is he in your team at the moment?
He's actually not in my team at the moment, but he is obviously quite high on my list. I'm just tinkering with my team to see if I can fit him in. I have Cumming
Right
in my
now.
side at the moment instead. So I will probably tinker with it a bit more to make sure that I can fit him in. But I'm also wary of going overkill with the mid prices, because that is what I usually do. But I definitely think he should be almost higher up my list than Cerra, to be honest, because you're right, I did have my eye on him for pretty much 70% of last season. I never quite brought him in, actually, just because my team was riddled with injuries and I never quite got the opportunity to bring him in. But yeah, just what you said, MJ, you hit the nail on the head this time. Just also that defensive element of his game with his tackles just brings in those extra points as well. So that's always a bonus as well. And I do think that he will have that role at the Crows.
So if we're sticking here, I'll keep us in the midfield, because this does create a really interesting question about how many of these guys can we stick in there, and especially when we think we probably can put in a Sid Draper and a Jagger Smith and some of these, maybe Levi Ashcroft, some of these high-end draft picks as well, and we still want to, find room for a Bontempelli or a Butters or these guys. So how you can make the jigsaw all fit together, because the guy we haven't really touched on yet, but I think we have to, is Clayton Oliver. 465,000, which is just an insane price. That's more than 200 grand less than he was this time last year. Obviously, plenty of reasons for that. Only averaged 84 last year, which is his worst ever, basically. But plenty of reasons for that. Had effectively zero preseason. Then even during the season, he had some injury niggles that he was battling with, and the Demons, just things sort of all pretty much went off the rails. So, there's obviously, we want to track his preseason and make sure that he's focused where we want him to be and everything. But I just can't see this being a bad pick at that such low price point. How could it possibly go worse than last year? So it's going to be very hard I can't see myself starting without him unless something crazy happens between now and round one.
We talked about Macrae's history as well. Clayton Oliver hasn't averaged under 109 aside from his rookie season and last season as well. So another guy with just supreme SuperCoach talent. I can't believe he played 21 games last year. That's the thing that's just surprising to me. Like, I think that's the reason he's off so many people's, he's on their never again list. So some people will be afraid to go there. But at the end of the day, I think given the price, given that history, he's still going to be one of the most popular picks when we get to see those ownership percentages soon. So yeah, another lock for me as well, Al.
Yep, I think we can pretty much agree on that at this stage of the preseason anyway. So we've already gone a few midfielders, but Chloe, you got another one for us, or we can take us somewhere else on the ground?
Yes, I might go to a new spot on the ground. I might just dabble in the defence for a little minute. Kane Farrell at 445K. Priced at 83, I think he can go a lot higher than that in the absence of Houston, and he also doesn't have that early buy either. So we didn't really get to see him in the team without Houston at the end of the year with that hamstring injury. But, you know, he's just such a good scorer already. And then you take Houston out of the team. I just think that role is there for him. I am slightly concerned that maybe a Burton, an Evans or a Burgoyne could, you know, take that role from him. But
Logan Evans, your man.
yeah, I know.
Picked him last year. That was such a good pick.
Yeah, I know.
He did
I'm
get
also
some of
pretty
those
big on
kick-ins.
him, actually. But, you know, I think that the role will go to Farrell. And his kick-ins, he was the number one last year for Port with 96% to play on. So
Yeah, and Houston was number 2 with 80. So they basically had a 50-50 split on the kick-ins. So it's really, where do those kick-ins go? And obviously if Farrell gets all of them, that's a pretty easy way to boost his average. But there's a few other players in the mix, but we'll get a look at that over the preseason, I guess. I mean, MJ, Josh Sin is another one that I know some people have some high hopes for over there at Port. But do you think Kane Farrell is the I know he's one of your favourites, but is Farrell the leading contender over there, do you think?
I think he's a contender. He's already getting so much of the ball and has to be a preseason watch, doesn't he? Like Chloe's talked about the vacancy that's existing and the opportunity for scoring. And so there's absolutely that room for it and has to be a preseason watch for how Port structure up their ball movement. If they start to move the ball a little bit faster, they've been notoriously quite short, sharp kicks, and then players like Farrell and Houston as the only longer booming kicks that kind of deliver the ball forward 50 of the ball. If they change up that Ken Hinckley game style a little bit, well, it might not help us regardless who gets some of that Lions share, but he's got to be someone you watch, whether, again, it's Evans, Burton, Sin, any of these other names. I think we do need to watch when such an important player to Port's ball movement has left. Someone's got to pick up some of that share. And if it is Farrell, who's one of those contenders, then yeah, this is someone that's going to present some value with a great early fixture. And again, no early buys. Yeah,
and they have Port has that great mid-year buy as well if we get through that far. Just sharing the buy with the Saints in round 13, so easy to cover then as well. But Darcy, quick one on him at 445k. Are we getting into awkward territory with? I mean, does he nearly have to be a keeper at that price, or could we afford to make $100,000 and sell him off?
I think, yeah, like it is awkward. You'd want him to be a premium, but somebody does have to take that role. So he's one to watch, and I think it's a massive preseason watch, and he's probably not a name that, you know, stacks of coaches are just immediately pegging into their starting team, because he's not that sexy name that we've heard in the past in SuperCoach. You know, he's more of a draft player traditionally. But without Dan Houston in the side, there is that room for opportunity. But I do think, to your point, Al, he probably does have to be more of a premium at sort of that price. And I guess to that point as well, a lot of these guys priced in that 80 to 85 or, you know, upwards of 90, which is what up to 500k would be. I think that's what you'd probably want. Now, I know MJ probably can speak to this a bit more. He's a bit more in the weeds as well with his most relevant. But is that what you're after in a mid-pricer at that price?
To a degree it is. I think it also just depends what your profile of how many mid prices you've got and how you like to trade. SuperCoach is so much about the trading games, and with the boosts that we've got and now the additional position on field of the flex, how much do you back yourself in as a strong, aggressive trader? Because to make that 100k and get a 95-ish sort of average, that might be enough for others, and others that are like, no, I like to be a bit different with my upgrade cadence of how I move. So I don't think he has to be a keeper in that spot, but if he's not, you want him knocking on the door pretty hard, that's for sure.
Yep. Darcy, you're up next with your second pick in this sort of draft, if we're going to call it that, but who have you got for us?
Yeah, I've traditionally been known as the one to go for the sort of the outside picks, but today I'm going real straight bat. Bailey Smith is my second pick, another one that we just have to talk about given his value and given he'll be one of the most owned players in SuperCoach unless injury or otherwise strikes before the round one occurs. But 389,000 mid forward for Bailey Smith, priced at 72. Missed the entirety of last year with the ACL. Now he's at the Cats as well. So the issues that he had in 2023 at the Western Bulldogs, not really getting exposed to that midfield time, or at least not starting in the midfield. He'd often start on a half forward, which is why we've got that forward status. You'd expect him to move into a more midfield friendly role at the Cats. but also just the price, regardless of where he plays on the field. 72, he's never averaged under that in his career. Even in his rookie year, he was averaging 75 SuperCoach or close to 76. So typically plays a lot of games as well, aside from obviously missing the entirety of last season. So I just look at the Cats midfield as well, and this is where it kind of excites me in terms of what role we're going to see. The Cats midfield just really doesn't have an identity at the moment. I feel like they're going to move into that this season in really understanding what that identity is. Look at the centre bounce attendances last year for the Cats. Dangerfield's still up there, so I'm ignoring the rucks here. So Dangerfield 66%. So that's pretty low attendances anyway for a prime mid. Tanner Bruin 57%. Brandon Parfitt 55. Tom Atkins 54. Like, this is the midfield mix you've got. You've got Jack Bowes, Jai Clark, Cam Guthrie, who barely played as well last year. Max Holmes sort of started to get exposed to. I think we'll probably see a bit more. And then Tom Stewart was thrown in and switched with Max Holmes almost towards the back end of last year. So Bailey Smith just has a role in there. We've already heard from Dangerfield that he's going to be part of that midfield unit. It's just a bargain. I don't really need to say much more than that. He's under 400k. Bailey Smith as a forward, another potential lock for our SuperCoach starting squads.
The only sort of little red flag that came up when you were talking then was, like, I think quite a few people picked Tanner Bruin last year or even the year before. Was it on very similar logic? Like, I don't know how Geelong keeps doing this. They keep making finals and being successful, and you look at their midfield and think, well, who's in there? And, there's anyone who comes from another club can just walk in and be their number one centre bounce mid. And it doesn't seem to always work out that way. But as you say, at the price that he's at, you can't really go wrong with Baslenka, can you?
No, just a quick talk about someone else who came there with a bit of an injury history last season. Jack Bowes managed 22 games last season and managed to average 82, which is, close to one of his best seasons as well. So just the fact that he managed to play so many games as well, and even got some exposure, 39% centre bounces for him, which he hadn't played really much midfield before arriving there. They just need some more pizzazz in there, I think, Al, but interested in your thoughts as well, Chloe. Is he just a lock?
Definitely a lock for me. I think that, we've touched on it, but Geelong, I think, yes, it's been a bit haphazard, but they are kind of crying out for that anchor. And I think, obviously, some of us have fallen into the trap with Tanner Bruin. That was actually one that I didn't fall into, lucky me. But, I think that someone like Bailey Smith, heads above, no offence to Tanner Bruin, but I think that he'll definitely lock down that role in there. So I don't have too many qualms about picking him in my side.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about some guys coming back off long-term injuries, and Smith did his ACL in December 2023. What was it? So he's had heaps of time to recover. He's back in full training already, whereas some of the others might be sort of making a bit more of a later run at it. So he should be absolutely fit and firing, ready to go.
Had a Euro summer in there too. So
yep. I guess the only thing we need to, which will come up repeatedly, in fact, I might even tie it in just to segue beautifully into a guy that I want to talk about too, is that he does have the round 3 bye, which is the one that I think is going to potentially trip up people next year. We generally want to avoid players with the early buys. Maybe you can get away with it if you've only got 1 or 2 players missing, but we're talking about in round 3. If I find my little list here, we got Geelong, Sydney, Collingwood, and Brisbane all missing. So it is best 18 scoring. We have the flex, so there's a bit of backup there to help us out. But if we're already looking at picking, Bailey Smith and maybe you've got an Ashcroft or 2, and Kitty Coleman's very cheap. He'll be potentially, I think we'll be talking about him on the next sort of bargain show below 300k guys. So can you fit in a Bailey Smith and Callum Mills, who, I mean, just at the price is very hard to leave out. He is priced at 66 points a game, and in 2022 he averaged 116. So we know, that was a career best, but he's averaged 112 in a season before. He does get thrown around a bit, or he has in the past, but now the Swans have a new coach, so we'll keep an eye on what Dean Cox wants to do with him. But never got going last year, had that ridiculous bad Monday shoulder injury, only played 6 home and away games in the end. So ideally, I think we'd want to see him in the centre bounces, but he's only at 356k, so he's one of these guys that, I could see him becoming a season-long keeper, but even if he gets up to a 90-something average, which I think is easily within his wheelhouse, he'd make us enough money that you could then potentially trade him on. So if it wasn't for that round 3 bye, I think I'd just be locking him in and throwing away the key. But then it becomes a real juggling act. I'm not sure if someone else will throw it, but there's another Swans name in a similar price bracket. Also in the defence, which doesn't help things. And, Kitty Coleman's back there as well. So, yeah, it's going to be a tricky one managing how many we can carry on that round 3 bye. But, I do really like Callum Mills as a Supercoach pick.
Wow, and Al just leapfrogging MJ in our draft.
Oh, did I jump? I did too.
Taking Callum Mills. Hopefully,
the segue was too good. I had to jump into it.
Callum Mills wasn't next on the board there, MJ, for you.
He wasn't there, but I will naturally pick up to the play. No, not at all. I'll pick up on the player he's alluded to in Matt Roberts in at number 2 for us there. Defender, 434, 800 last year, an average of 80.7. It's pretty rare a player does one of 2 things for you in the same year. They become a valuable cash cow and they become a premium performer in the same season. Like this is Sheasel, Dacos, Roberts, are kind of some that have done it in recent seasons for us. He inherited a new role in the back half of the year. And I think it's completely aligned to the injury of Justin McInerney because he only really got going in the last 7 games of the year. He goes a 110 average in those last 7. McInerney goes down injured halfway through one of those games. And then in the last 6 of the year, he goes at that average of 113.7, which that's 30 plus points per game of value. We're talking about if he can maintain that for the season based on what he's going to potentially deliver for us. But it's so challenging because not only have you got the McInerney back into the side, you've got moving pieces that are now uncertain. Mills, as Al's mentioned, is he back as a centre bounce midfielder? Is he in the wings? He's played half forward and then been an interceptor through that defensive line. So that changes how Mills impacts Roberts. Does McInerney start to come back in and cut off some of that ball movement of Roberts? They picked up Riley Bice through the draft, who's a real dashing defender and is really impressing the club at the moment. Does this see all of a sudden now some more movement shakes around and then the dreaded buys of, well, if you're keen on Mills, which Al's talked about, and you think Kitty Coleman's undeniable value, well, how are you going to fit Roberts in? And that's just the defensive line, let alone you're looking at Ashcroft, Neal, Dunkley, Dacos, Smith, DeGoey. Like all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if it's best 18, you're heading towards 14 on field. So you've really got to tier out who do you like more, who's got not only just a security of scoring, but security of role. And there is a world I can see Mills back in the centre bounce and Heaney pushing more forward because their forward line looked impotent at times last year. And he is their best non-tall, non-small hybrid that it makes a lot of sense to go, Heaney, help fix our forward line. Mills, we know you can sort our midfield out, and Roberts, you and Blakey sort it out. So there's a world where all these moving pieces could just hinge on 1 or 2 people.
Yeah, massive. Braden Campbell's the other one who you think at some stage he's going to get a crack at a regular in a sort of best 22 spot, and we know what he can do. He plays again a very similar role. Probably Jake Lloyd's the one we've loved in the past, but he's maybe been pushed out by those other guys. But there's no shortage of options for them back there. Swinging back around to Chloe, your 3rd pick. I'm trying to make sure I get the order right this time, but apologies for that. But who do you like for us here?
So my final pick, who is also in my team at the moment, is Will Day, Hawthorn at 491.3K. So I did have him at the back end of last year, and I did unfortunately have to ride that whole series of events with the tag and the subbed off and then the collarbone. It wasn't the best ride, but his averages have been in the 90s for the past 2 years. So I think this will finally be the year where he can average 100 plus, just mainly due to natural progression, to be honest. And I just see him as such an integral part of that Hawthorn team, obviously missing finals. Maybe if he was there, they could have got over the line. You just never know. So I do think he's a bit of a game changer for the Hawks. And yeah, he's in my team just mainly due to natural progression. It's not like some of these other guys with role change or he did have quite an injury interrupted year, but not as stressful Supercoach wise as someone like a Cerra. So I think it's a bit less risky, but he does have that round 4 bye as well. Priced at 91, so he'd have to keep consistent with his current average. But I think, as I said, he will go above that and be able to string together a 100-plus average this year.
You take out 2 or 3 of those injury-affected games, that immediately bumps him up a few points. And he had a great run last year between rounds 10 and 20 where he averaged 114, actually. With 9 out of those 10 games over 100, and I think the other one was in the 90s. So he has shown he can do it. I mean, obviously extremely skillful player. Another mid-pricer in the midfield. Darcy, what do you think on Will Day?
Yeah, I do love Will Day. I think he's probably not been as much in my planning given that bye. But aside from that, we've seen him he's in that mold of a Jordan Dawson or a Hayden Young who can potentially go, 100 to 105 as a basement. So it's just, he's so clean with it. He can tackle. He does it all, and he's super efficient. So I love Will Day as a player, and certainly as a SuperCoach prospect. Yeah, like you said, he had a few issues last year, but he's one that without the bye, I think he'd be straight into my squad. I was eyeing him off all last season, saying, all these things going wrong for him. This year is going to be his year. So look out for Will Day, and I suppose if you've got room and you can balance those buys, he's one to consider.
So shares Hawthorn and Essendon share a buy in round 4. So just the 2 teams. And if you don't have many other Hawks or Bombers, you could maybe afford to carry one of them. I mean, his injuries, something we have to factor in. He's one of these guys who just doesn't. It's not like a Cerra that does his hamstring every 2 or 3 months. He just always seems to find a way to get hurt or something, some kind of mishap sidelines him at some stage.
Yeah, it's a bit Lockie Whitfield-like, isn't it? It's like it's just some kind of medical warfare game where he finds a way to hurt himself, and none of them feel connected whatsoever. It's just like he's spun a wheel of injuries, and whatever it lands on, that's what he's going to go down with. I think it's just balancing a selection like him with what are your other injury risk profile players that you're going to look for. And so someone we kicked off the 50 most relevant with is Sean Darcy, who I know, Dossie, you're on this year, but we're going to stick into the mid-price lane for it is just a type of players that if you put him in the mix, so you pick others that we've talked through that have injury histories, all of a sudden your risk profile gets really, really high, and you can really quickly burn a lot of trades if it all goes wrong. So I think he has to be in that mix, and he looks so good in that Hawthorn structure. I don't think it's an incidental occurrence that he comes back into that side and they instantly start winning last year, and they structures up that midfield so much better. So to me, it's just balancing out where you want to take your risk profile with injuries. And if you're on day, well, it's going to be harder to be on a Cerra type or others in the same line, let alone across the team. Otherwise, if it all goes well, you're laughing and you're 3 weeks ahead of the pack, but it goes two or 3 injuries in a round, and all of a sudden you're looking at SuperCoach 2026.
Darcy, who's your final pick in today's mid-price show?
Now, I think I'd love to go with a Harley Reid. I would love to go there, but I think I've already mentioned him 15 times on every show we've done so far. So I'll skip over that. If anyone's got him, that's all right. But the reason I'm not talking about him is because all of the improvement is relying on natural progression. There's no other real upside in terms of he's already played full-time midfield. He's just going into his second year. So I'm just you'd be banking on like a Nick Dacos improvement and a Sheasel improvement, which I think even them, they kind of saw better role changes in year 2. So I'll just skip past Harley Reid. I really want to talk about him. I'm going to talk about a player that has been sort of in a bit buzzing in the SuperCoach community. And I've seen in a fair few teams, or at least a few teams that, have some idea of what they're doing. And that's Jayden Short for Richmond. He's coming in at a nice cheap price compared to what he's done in the past. Several seasons over 95. So his past 4 seasons before 2024 have been 95 plus. This last season, 82 in a dismal Richmond team. Now, I do have some concerns. Like, I'm sort of being the devil's advocate bringing him up. I have some concerns in that Richmond were already shocking last year. No offense, Al. So really, they were in being in that backline last season. That was the year to feast. He had 95 kick-ins, which we've only got kick-in data from about 2021, and he only had slightly less than that. So scoring 82 SuperCoach points, he had his traditional kick-to-handball ratio, which is ludicrous, nearly 18 kicks to 5 handballs. So knows how to kick the pill. Jayden Short's just one to watch with all those veterans moving out of the team. You've got a Liam Baker leaving, a Shea Bolton leaving, Dusty Martin retiring. So there's just going to be lots of Sharon, a lot of kids in that team this year. I'll pass over to you, Al, as the Richmond fan, to sort of speak more about this pick. But I've seen Jayden Short as a really popular option early days. Plenty of seasons averaging over 90 in there. So I think the idea is that veterans moving out, it's going to be in Richmond's defence a lot this year. If he's retaining that role, he's going to take all the kick-ins like he always does and just feed back there and essentially just go from 82. He'll improve at least 10 points, say.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those names leaving, and the key one, I think, when it comes to Jayden Short is Dan Rioli.
Sorry, Rioli's the one I missed. Yeah.
Wasn't a big kick-in taker. Only took 34 last year compared to, say, Short's 95, as you mentioned. So there's not a heap of extra kick-ins to pick up, but he was clearly the go-to man coming out of defence if there was any kind of rebound or attack out of there for Richmond, which there wasn't a whole lot, as you said. Rioli was the one doing it. So with him gone, I've heard some talk about, some of the kids getting a bit more opportunity, Sam Banks, these kind of guys. But, Short, obviously, premiership veteran now, really, and there will be a lot of responsibility go back onto someone like him. I mean, Nick Flostone's there as well. He's always someone who's teased us a little bit in SuperCoach, but he's not really your attacking defender, more of an interceptor. So I think a lot of the footy will go through Short. The only thing is that just makes me nervous is, last year he sucked a lot of people in. He scored about 130 in opening round. And I know our good friend Tim Mitchell picked him in his starting team, and then he was really pretty terrible for a fair chunk of the season. And looking at over his numbers and trying to compare them to those years where he did average, around, I think he averaged 98 3 years in a row or something. It's sort of hard to pinpoint exactly what changed. Whether his role seemed pretty similar. I know Damien Hardwick liked to throw him into the midfield, and he'd bob up in sort of weird positions occasionally, but. I think Adamuzze played him basically in that same sort of role across half-back and sort of maybe a bit on the wing, but it just didn't happen for him last year. And as you say, Richmond, we're not expecting them to improve a whole lot in 2025. So how many points are there going to be there for Richmond players in the defence? But yeah, I'd be surprised if he averaged under 90. It's just, is there enough of a bump there to justify, picking him in the back line down there when we have a lot of players competing for those spots. But any thoughts on, we haven't seen Short in the top 50 yet, MJ, is he someone who might appear down the track?
No comment. I think something's got to change for Richmond, doesn't it, with that ball movement? You don't lose a quarter of your best 22. And one of the biggest gravy trains for SuperCoach has been teams that are developing heavily through youth. The experience is there needs to take some of the pressure off that and hold the ball. And we saw that towards the back of last year. Richmond's game style evolved a little bit and they did start to possess the ball a little bit more heavily. If that happens, all these kind of pathways can lead towards Short pushing back into that high 90s average without doubt. Now, is it going to be Jack Zeeble, Aaron Hall in North Melbourne territories? I don't think it'll get to those sort of heights, but definitely to me, Al, I hear what you're talking about with Richmond and go, yeah, there's a world where Short's pretty good for us.
Yep. And I think, no doubt over the preseason, there'll be plenty of talk about the Tigers and, the obvious thing to think about is, all these kids coming in and they're going to get opportunities. But as you say, what tends to happen in those situations in very, very young teams is that, some of those older guys who have hung around need to take on a bit more responsibility. And especially, I can see it being a bit of a rough, certainly, first half of the year for the Tigers with, a lot of those draftees aren't necessarily going to be playing straight away. And they've got some of these, Josh Gibcus types coming back off injury who might not be ready to start the year either. So, someone like Shorty who hopefully will step up and fill some of that void.
Yeah,
so
my bad.
The opportunities there.
Forgetting Dan Rioli there. I think I'm just so used to seeing him on the beautiful red on red already that just skipped my mind. So I'm actually way more tempted now that I just skipped over him. So yeah, Jayden Short, certainly an option.
And who have you got for us with your final mid-price pick, MJ?
Oh, look, let's go back to the midfield.
You get him before me this time.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go back to the midfield, shall we? Let me give you some hundreds and some averages just to tease out the player a little bit. Seasonal average of 114.1 with 15 tonnes. A seasonal average of 110.9 with 12 tonnes. And a seasonal average of 108 with 13 tons. That's what this player did in 21, 22, and 23, and he's coming in at a price point of $481,400 this year and an average of 89.3. Darcy Parish. We probably should put some respect on his name a little bit, shouldn't we? We're talking about a player that when he's on the field, he's not just limping over the lines to a low 100 and putting that dilemma point that you brought up, Al, during the podcast of, is it enough to keep? Are you trading at the buy? How do you manage it? Like, this is a guy that is right on the ledges of the top 10 of our premium midfielders for 3 seasons in a row. And now we've got, if you want to go off his best year, 25 points per game of value based on his current price point to what he did in 2021, which at a guy at 90 is just wild levels of value. His percentage dropped away in centre bounces and in disposals, but we know injuries was the causation for that. Some are really fascinated at how Essendon's midfield mix looks like. To me, Merritt is unquestionable in that centre bounce role. And Parish is not too far behind it as far as I'm concerned. They can do a bunch of other different things with that side. They do have a lot of versatility. But to me, I'd absolutely put him there. The concern is the injuries that are there with 12 games, 18 games, 16 games in the 3 prior seasons. But again, if you don't like any of the other kind of mid-prices that we're sitting in there, then I don't mind a piece of him, that's for sure.
Yeah, you just look at a sort of an average season by him is sort of, 108, 110, which is, but you'd be pretty happy with that at that price, that's for sure. It's just, I know Essendon supporters sometimes not necessarily Darcy Parish's biggest fan, so it's hard to get a real read on where he fits in, but he pretty much plays midfield, doesn't he? There's no real other spot for him, so...
I think as well with that one, especially this year more so, we really just saw Merritt cop the brunt of the tags when he wasn't there. So I'm sure teams will still look to target Merritt this year just because he had such a great year last year. So I think that even opens up even more scoring potential for someone like Parish. So.
Yeah, he has had some tags in the past. So, you think hopefully that won't be such a big issue this year. So we've been going for a while. I'll try and I've got plenty of names here that we haven't had time to get through, but we might do a very quick run through at the end of some of the names we haven't discussed. And there's some that I still really like, but I'm going to chuck up one that I just would be keen to hear other people's thoughts on because I'm still not 100% sure. And I think he's a great player to discuss. And that is Mattaes Phillipou at 313,800. He's a mid forward, so you'd be picking him in your forward line. Or potentially in the flex if there's so many good mid prices you can't fit them all in, which is where I'm kind of sitting at the moment. But priced at just 58, had a really interesting year last year where he really battled in the first half of the year, averaged 42 SuperCoach points over the first 10 rounds, and he went back to the VFL, reportedly told Ross Lyon, I want to go back there and just give me some midfield time and let me learn how to play there because that's what I want to do, and that's what he did and had some good numbers in the VFL, then came back in round 17 into the AFL team, scored 112 in his first game back, looked fantastic, then 101 the next game, had over 60% CBAs in both those games. So he was someone that jumped onto a lot of people's radar. And then unfortunately, the last sort of month of the year got a little bit derailed. He had a hip problem, missed a couple of games, came back in and scored okay, sort of more in the 80s in his last couple. So, just leaves him in a really interesting spot coming into 2025. I mean, Dos, you talked about Geelong needing a bit of pizzazz in the midfield. Well, St Kilda, you can take that and sort of double it really. They've brought in Jack Macrae, who we know is a real workhorse, but he's not exactly a sort of a highlights reel kind of player, but Mattaes has shown he can be that. Obviously, that's sort of what they wanted when they picked him, and I think picked 10 in the draft. The potential is definitely there, and he's very, very cheap, but even, those scores at the end of last year were sort of low tons, even sort of more in the 80s. So I guess I think he's definitely someone who's going to be on the up this year, but how high an expectation can we put on him, I guess, is just probably the thing we need to be maybe a little bit wary of. But where do you sit on that, MJ, without giving too much away? Because I'm sure he's someone who will bob up in the top 50 at some stage.
Oh, yeah, I don't have to be as hiding that one. He does appear in the 50. It's pretty safe to say. I think you're right about balancing out our expectations because a lot has changed at St Kilda's ball movement with the arrival of Jack Macrae. If he does anything like Dos has suggested in terms of midfield opportunity and market share of ball, Brad Crouch wasn't in the side last year anyway. Seb Ross was barely in the side through the midfield anyway. So that's the only thing I would say is potentially there's maybe not that premium at a value price we all think he's going to be and a season-long hold. He's going to make us money, though, isn't he? If he's getting through that midfield, he's going to generate cash. I fully expect him to be a popular mid-pricer for us in SuperCoach. I'd probably just temper expectation a little bit because Macrae coming in is going to take a chunk of that market share of scoring.
What about you, Chloe? Where do you sit on Mattaes? Is he a walk-up start for you in 2025?
Yes, he is. But I do share the concern re Macrae's role. But I do still think, yeah, as you said, MJ, he'll definitely make a fair bit of money. I will just note as well those last two games where he didn't really have many CBAs, scored around the 80s. I didn't watch the game against Geelong, but I know that the game against Carlton, final round, Liam Stocker was actually in the middle tagging Patrick Cripps. So that obviously takes one of those centre bounce spots away. So I do really think it depends on, Ross and his magnets and what he plans to do, which is always a bit of an issue. But I think that Phillipou is someone who he definitely would have in that spot. I did go down to St Kilda at the end of last year. Now we can say last year, 2024, and he was looking good. I think that there is definitely a role there for him. But at the same time, they do also have Travalia to try and fit in potentially. Potentially Wilson might roll through there. And then players like Winhager, Hunter Clark. So then they also brought in Jack Carroll. So I would just and Paddy Dow they've got as well. How can I forget? So there's if you're locking in Steele and Macrae, yeah, I do think we should temper expectations. I don't think he's necessarily a lock in their midfield when you've got so many of those other names floating around that the club also do seem to rate a few of those guys too. So it'll definitely be an interesting watch, but maybe some quick early money. And move him on, but I definitely plan to start him in my side.
Yep, I think that's where a lot of us sit at this stage. But as always, the preseason will tell us a lot more. But Darcy, I know you've got a little list. Well, it's probably not a little list because there's a heap of other names that we didn't get to, and we put out some social media call-outs. Was there anybody that people wanted us to talk about that we've missed?
Yeah, there's stacks, obviously, but I'll just touch on some of the names. And, if anyone here wants to have a quick word about any, go ahead. Otherwise, I might just throw to one or two really key names before we sign off. But Colby McKercher is one that's been mentioned. He's just under 500. He's at 476K. Plenty of names we did mention, by the way, getting repeatedly mentioned. So I think we have touched on some of the real popular ones here. Harry Perryman is one. We've got Finn Callahan was an interesting one, given GWS did lose James Peatling. That could be a really interesting one to see who fits in their midfield this year. George Wardlaw, the Phantoms man, in there as well. 460K for George Wardlaw. You have to pay. Very awkward price. Jake Saligo even. One really popular one that we haven't mentioned, Will Ashcroft at 441K has been mentioned a couple of times. I've seen sort of a mixed feeling in the community just because of that early buy, I think, for Will Ashcroft. But Chloe, we haven't had you on the show so far this year. What's your thoughts on Will Ashcroft starting with him this year, the reigning Norm Smith medalist?
This is probably bad, but I actually can't remember off the top of my head whether he's in my current team picker because I've done that many of them. But yes, most of the time 440 is a bit of an awkward price, but I think for him it could turn out to be quite a steal. Obviously, they've already got a great midfield up at the Lions anyway, but I mean, we all saw what he did in the grand final. It's and to have that much impact after coming off the ACL, everybody knows, it's documented all over his socials how hard he works, how much he trains. So I just think you can't question the fact that he'll get even better. So in the finals, the 113, the 74, and then the 128 SuperCoach in the grand final, that's just insane considering it's a grand final. So I think that he's definitely one that you have to consider. As I said, not 100% sure that he's in there at the moment. But if he isn't, then the plan is to get him in after that bye because, I think he's in for a strong year.
Yeah, it's such a tough one in that they've just got such a loaded midfield, but are we just ignoring something that's just so obvious? This guy's continually improving. He's likely going to be in that midfield mix. And if he's not, he's still just a natural scorer on the outside, can do it all. Stood up on the biggest stage on the planet. Do we just ignore his buy and bring him in? I know MJ, he'll no doubt be another one that is appearing, but your just brief thoughts on Will Ashcroft for this coming season.
The beautiful thing is we're protected with opening round, aren't we? We get a look at and a see of it, and he's only going to have the one price movement in SuperCoach before he hits the buy and gets on buy, and we can almost take a little bit of a luxury look and see, not just with what he does in opening round, but if any of these mid prices through the midfield that we've mentioned, let alone more that I'm sure are the social media questions there, Dossie, if one of them just die for you, it's a really easy parachute option over to Ashcroft. So the beauty of him is, even if he does come out of the gates and go 95 to 100, and you're like, oh, it's not bad, it's not amazing, it's still good, you can jump over to him really easy, and at what, maybe $30,000 to $50,000, $80,000 that you're not banking on. So just because you don't start him, I think he's still pretty relevant regardless.
Yeah, it's a great point. Opening round, something that we should consider, that, it's all our teams are going to just drastically change after that, and we'll have to do a massive podcast after that one to just take in all that information, Al. But yeah, look, we've touched on a bunch of the people that people want to hear about on social. So I think I'm pretty happy with that, Al, and a pretty solid podcast. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few other names on my list. We can have another month or two to talk about all these guys. But Luke Parker's one that I initially thought, well, he's probably just going to be too expensive, but he's actually really cheap. So just don't forget about him. I mean, North's going to be really hard. You mentioned even Colby McKercher. We probably want to pick Harry Sheasel. LDU's getting a lot of talk as well. Like how many of these North guys can we actually pick, and who's going to get the midfield minutes? But Parker's one that just to keep an eye on, at only 340k, so 343. So a lot of value there. And another guy which I'm not very happy with the fact that he left Richmond, but I think Shea Bolden is going to slot in at Fremantle, and I can just. Maybe it's my pessimistic Tiger fan thinking, but I can just see him being an absolute star there. He just seems to me the exact type of player that they need. We talk about pizzazz and adding a bit of spark, whether it's in the midfield or in the forward line. He'll probably start forward of centre most of the time, I imagine, but doesn't mean he can't score SuperCoach points, because all those goals and score involvements and inside 50s and things are all good for scoring. And we know he's a guy who has shown he has a massive ceiling. He can drop a really bad game every now and then, but with the flex, maybe that gives you cover for you can get away with a few of those over the course of the year, and just really enjoy those really, really massive scores, which I expect will be coming again. Freo have a great draw. I think they do play the Tigers fairly early on, and they've got a derby against the Eagles early too. So there's a potential there to bank some early points. So he's another name that might somehow try and fit into my forward line. I mean, I thought the forward line was going to be the spot for all the mid prices, but after today, there's a heap in the midfield as well. So yeah, you could, as we said off the top, you could nearly pick a whole team of them going into 2025. But plenty more to talk about over the coming months and month or two in pre-season. And as I said, there's a whole nother batch of guys even cheaper than that we can look at as well. That will be there was too many of them to fit into this show, so we've had to break it out and give them a whole show to themselves next week. So plenty of cheap value names to talk about in SuperCoach this year for sure.
No doubt. Yeah, we've got that coming. We're going to talk premiums as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the guys that are going to hold our team together. But thanks so much for joining us, MJ. Just give us for anyone that hasn't listened to your fantastic show, and I just saw, the number 44 and the most relevant, Adam Cerra, I'm going to have to go listen to that podcast after here. But just give us a shout out to where we can find you.
Yeah, you could search for the Coaches Panel anywhere across social media, X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're all there. Yep, I'm a 40-year-old man on TikTok. I'm really devastated by that, but that's totally okay. Wherever you get your audio podcasts, just simply search for the Coaches Panel, and then we're on YouTube as well with the video feed. So make sure you check it out. We're collaborating with some of the great SuperCoach content creators, and Dossie as well will also be in that mix as well.
No worries. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks Al and Chloe as well for jumping on. And you can find us obviously as well on YouTube, Code Sports. If you're not already watching here, that's where you can find all the SuperCoach AFL shows. And then Spotify, Apple, we'd really appreciate a rating and review. Going to be plenty more shows to come. Like I said, next up we've got bargains below 300k. Then we're going to be talking some premiums, and it just goes on in pre-season. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.